first presentation, we have Dr. Jeff Thomason and Dr. Tom Wright. Jeff and Tom, I invite you to go ahead and share your screen while I do some introductions. Jeff is an emeritus professor at the Ontario Veterinary College, where he taught students, including myself, anatomy for almost 30 years. Jeff's research includes work in horses and the mechanics of locomotion, and he was instrumental in the development of the technology for horses that was used in the study presented here with dairy cows. Joining Jeff is Dr. Tom Wright. Tom is a dairy cattle specialist with OMAFA, and he's also an adjunct professor in the Animal Biosciences Department at the University of Guelph. Tom works with many industry groups in the dairy sector and is also an advisor for the progressive dairy operators. So over to you, Jeff and Tom.
Hi, this is Jeff. Thanks for the introduction. I'm just going to jump right in with the talk. Dr. Julie French, now DVM, practicing, I assume, in the dairy industry, I'm not sure. When she was not even a veterinary student, came to me and said, "Can I do a fourth-year project with you?" And I often had students doing fourth-year projects on horse locomotion, and she said, no, I want to do cows. So that was our first conversation, and it very soon ballooned into including all these people you see on the screen, and also lots of people not on the screen, the staff out at the Aurora Dairy Research Station, part of the university, into a project on how easily cows slip on different surfaces. And so that's the focus of the project, is comparing surfaces that are commonly used in dairy barns and just happened all to be in the Aurora dairy barn, and walking cattle over them and seeing how easily they slipped. Oops, how do we go forward? There we go. This I'm not going to hold you on this slide because everything will be, that's what we're going to do, the parts, but let's just get right into it. Yeah. So on the right, you see the 6 surfaces, and I'll introduce them in more detail later, but you can see instantly they look quite different from each other. And the main point that we were looking at is that flooring choice can increase the risk of slipping and falling. And one of the questions we were asking is, which of these surfaces is better at preventing slip? Because slipping over time, or if it's a bad fall, can increase both lameness and hoof disorders, and predispose to nasty things like white line disease and lesions. So it's a very basic study. It's not getting into anything clinical. It's just a basic comparison of what happens when you walk cows over these surfaces. My background's in horses, and I've had a long 28-year program looking at the hoof and track interaction in horses, because they commonly have lower limb problems. And so I had both the technology and the knowledge to be able to bring my 2 cents towards this project. The project was highly secret, and as you can see, I had my own personal bodyguard for the whole duration of the project. Those of you who know Christoph will probably recognize the man mountain standing next to me. But our basic project was asking the question, could the technology that I use on horses work with cows? There are a number of studies. There's 2 mentioned here, the motion of the feet on dry and slurry covered surfaces. And there's a number of others partly related to what we were doing, but nobody had actually measured what happens to the hoofs themselves as they make contact with the ground. How quickly do they grip? How likely are they to slip? Those are the kinds of questions we were looking at. What forces are on the feet? We ran a project with myself, and what we did was mostly Julie's work. I believe this is Julie leading a cow. She pre-selected 5 amenable cows, amenable in the sense they were easily trained to be led on a halter rope, as you can see here, at a set speed. So she preconditioned all the cows for the study. They had to have a normal gait. They had to have no detectable lameness, visually lame, and they had to have the temperament that they were quite happy being led by Julie. She did get roughed up a couple of times, but most of the time it was, as you can see, just a nice easy walk she was leading them at. I keep losing this cake. So what we did was we trained the cattle to walk with a backpack. This is a modified horse saddle, and there's very complex electronics in here that record all the data. And the data is collected from little sensors way down on the foot and just sent up the wires to the collector where we can analyze it later. And we put little sensors on the feet. And here's Tom and myself touching up the hind feet of one cow. One of my favorite moments is when I was actually a bit further behind the cow and it lifted its tail and peed all over me at a point where I couldn't leave the foot. So I just had to take the whole shooting match. But here's what we were doing, putting sensors on the feet. These little red ones measure the distortion of the hoof, how much the hoof changes shape as weight is put on it, taken off. So they give a nice indication of the relative amount of force on each claw and the relative amount of force with changes of gait and speed and things like that. The little gray box over here is an accelerometer, and that tells you how quickly it slows up and speeds. So yes, slows down and speeds up, and how much impact there is with the ground when it hits the different surfaces. And this is the primary data we were relying on, is how hard does the foot hit the ground when, depending on the surface that it's landing on. In other words, how much cushion or how little cushion are the different surfaces giving it. So we looked at 3 phases of the stance. First one was footfall, the moment the foot hits the ground, because it's a bit like clapping your hands. There's a bit of impact force that goes on right at that moment, because the foot has to decelerate very rapidly, make contact with the ground, and with a bit of luck, not slide. Sometimes it obviously does slide. So it's a period of high acceleration, but also strain on the hoof. Next, oh, here's a footfall. There we go. I'd forgotten the video was there. So just that moment of contact. The next is when the foot is planted and the weight of the body is transferring onto the foot. It's called the support phase. And at the middle of the support phase, when the leg's vertical, that's when maximum force is on the foot. And so any slip there is obviously a concern, because there's 3/4 of the weight of the cow bearing down on that foot at the time. And we measure that with the accelerometer, and I will show you slips later when we get to them. Oh, that's just on repeat. There we go. And then the last stage is foot off, just where the foot starts rolling off the ground. There's a little bit of extra strain on here because that's bearing all the weight, but it soon comes off, and then the foot just slides off the ground. And what we were interested in is the foot slipping out as it leaves the ground. So here's what the sensor, jumping straight to the data, here's what the sensor data look like. So this curve here going down is important. This is the strain, it's proportional to the force on the foot. It's going down because it's a compressive force, and that's just the convention. Compression goes down, tension goes up. So this is actually increasing force. And the maximal vertical load on the foot is not at mid-stance, but about 3/4 of the way through. Same for us, that's nothing unusual. So this is just saying, in some ways, both cows and humans walk the same. So this is just telling us, okay, there's some comparisons between the way different animals walk. Where the interesting data arrive are up in here. So this is that first footfall, foot making contact with the ground. That's how quickly it comes to a stop. The height of these spikes, and there's more than one because the accelerometer is recording in 3 directions. So the height of these spikes is telling you how quickly that foot is coming to a stop. It's the equivalent of you braking hard and smacking your head on the windshield. Comes to a stop that quickly. This deceleration here of 25 meters per second squared is equivalent to you smacking your hands together, clapping them together hard enough to hurt. And it does that with every footfall. So that's a significant amount. The deceleration is accompanied by a significant amount of force. Once the foot's planted, then the load on it increases down here, but it doesn't actually move, and that's good. That's just saying, okay, it's nice and firm on the surface, and that's how it should be. And I'm going to come back to this. This is where it starts moving. It's starting to roll off the ground, and here's where it goes up into the air. And these parts of the curves look quite normal. This particular one has a slip, that little very rapid acceleration and stop. And you can see it's happening really, really quickly. It's like, just looking at the units at the bottom, it's probably about 1/100th of a second or less. It's really quick. You can't see it happening. But at that point, there's more force on the foot because of the slide and stop. And also there's danger of the animal slipping out altogether because the foot is actually slipping even at a gentle walk. Do we need anything else on here? No, I think that sets us up. So slips occur, and we'll come back to how frequently they occur in a later slide. So what we did was at the Alora Dairy Research Centre, part of the University of Guelph, they've got all these different surfaces. So we were able to walk the cattle, the chosen 5 cattle over all of these surfaces. And the way we did it was for each cow, we randomized the order. So we couldn't say, okay, diamond groove concrete was always done first. That's why it looks different. So they were all randomized to take away that effect of bias. Turf grass, I'll come back to mention again, because that was an interesting opportunity. So these rubber mats are the kinds of things, and I'm going to show you them in a second, that are found throughout the industry. All the surfaces were washed and wet, so all the sand was washed off them, and they were wetted down. So if the cows were going to slip, they were going to slip on this surface because it was wet, but it was also clean. And Julie walked all the cows at a set speed, and we recorded the speed so we could see how much variation there was in the speed, and there wasn't much. She walked them, each cow, over all the surfaces. Each was filmed so we could sometimes see slipping going on, and we could also determine the walking speed. As I say, the walking speed was pretty constant. Julie got quite good at that. First surface, diamond groove concrete. I'm hoping you're going to start to recognize these as we go through. This is designed, concrete, so it doesn't wear too fast, but also the grooves provide edges for the feet to grip on so they don't slip too far. Concrete's durable and strong, and it lasts a long time, but it also has a rough surface, and there's potential that it could wear the hooves. Our experiment wasn't long enough to document any wear, but it makes sense that concrete is fairly hard on the feet. And general wear is not that much of a problem on the feet. When it becomes asymmetrical and uneven, then it can become a problem. So you don't really want your surface contributing uncontrollably to how it wears. Next surface, epoxy covered concrete, smooth surface with I believe a sand mixed in with the epoxy just to give it a bit of texture and a bit of grip. So the sand is intended to mitigate some slipping, but this is basically an easy, clean surface. Grooved rubber mat, which I believe is reused from mines, on the conveyor belts in mines and things like that. It comes like this. The diamonds on it, or the zigzags on it, are actually quite good because the fact that these edges go in different directions potentially allows the foot to grip better. And because there's a fair thickness of the rubber, it does most times reduce soreness and leg lesions because it's got a nice bit of cushion. It's like putting thick trainers on the training shoes on the feet of the cow. You put on the training shoe surface on the floor instead. and plenty of traction from this. It's a nicely, a very functional surface. I would say nicely designed, but it's not designed for this purpose. Rubber mat is designed for this, and I've seen lots of this in horse stables as well, where there's some raised texture on it, again, just to provide grip. It also reduces soreness and leg lesions because it's spongy to some extent. Again, thickness nearly 2 centimeters of the rubber. And cows seem to like standing on that. Then this is a low profile rubber. You can see there's texture on it, but it's not 3 millimeters. It's only 1 millimeters high. But again, it gives a nice cushion for standing around and just walking. And I think this is our last one. Yeah, last one, turf grass. It's a natural surface. It has a low risk of lameness. One of the strange features of our study was that the cattle that we used had never been out on turf. They'd been in the barn for their whole lives. And so we had to be very careful taking them out of the barn. In fact, had to lead them out on a halter tied to a tractor, just so they didn't take off across the field into the distance. And this particular surface had never had cows on it. So the surface didn't know the cows didn't know the surface, but they all seemed to enjoy walking on it. So there's our 6 surfaces. What did we find? One other thing we did was get a hardness tester, a drop hammer that tells you how hard the surface is that it's being dropped onto. It's got little sensors in it. And this is the profile of the different surfaces. The height of the bars indicates the hardness of the surface. So epoxy covered concrete came out hardest, turf grass came out lowest, the other concrete came up, the 2 concretes basically came together, the different rubbers came together, but you can see there's quite a difference between the highest and lowest in terms of the hardness. And then the turf grass was the softest because it had a good rich grass cover. So those results are interesting, but not unexpected. This is now the surface grip. So this is looking at the horizontal deceleration of the foot as the foot hits the ground. So the highest grip, the hoofs come to a stop much more quickly, like you hitting the brakes really hard on your car. So this had the most grip. This is the low profile rubber. One of the concretes, 2 more of the rubbers, one of the other concretes, and the turf grass. So this has the least grip. This not surprisingly, because it's so smooth, doesn't have much grip. The foot slid quite a long way along it. And then 2 of the other rubbers in between. I don't know really how you interpret this in a practical sense. It's interesting in that it doesn't put the 2 concretes together, and it doesn't put all the 3 rubbers together. So there's more going on in these surfaces than just the material they're made from. And so you can't just look at a surface and say, okay, that's a nice high profile rubber. It's going to have lots of cushion. It's going to have lots of grip. No, that's not true. These data show that you cannot predict the grip from the contour of the surface, from what it's made from. Cushioning. So this is now the foot descending into the surface. Turf grass was the softest, gave most cushion. Low profile rubber, also quite a high cushioning substance. Surprisingly, the epoxy covered concrete. This may be, I'm just speculating now because we had no other way to confirm my thought, but I'm suspecting that the cows may have put their own feet more delicately on this surface. And so the apparent softness of this concrete is an artifact of the cows walking on it more gently than the other surfaces. But I have no real way of proving that. If it's true, then this, what seems to be a very hard surface, isn't hard at all, or not as hard as the other concrete, which is way down here. So I think this is not an anomalous result because it occurred with all the cows, but it may be a measure of the way they walked rather than the hardness of the surface itself. And then the two rubbers and the final concrete, and we'd expect to find a concrete having the least cushioning, and that's what this particular concrete did. These rubbers are actually fairly hard as well, certainly compared to the turf and the low profile rubber. So the surfaces, diamond groove concrete, high vertical acceleration, high horizontal acceleration, suggesting it that could be related to the rate of wear on the hoof. Slow sideways movement, because our accelerometers were also recording sideways slip. So the feet, when they hit, if they're going to slide at all, it's front to back, not side to side. So slipping sideways and splaying, it certainly reduces that. We've got a cow walking, yes, apparently we do. There's the cow walking on this surface, waving its tail happily, or in disgust, one or the other. No, I forgot how we get out of it. Okay, diamond groove. Let's see it slow motion. Yeah, this is now slowed down. I was framing at 60 frames a second. This is obviously a free walking cow. It looks quite comfortable and natural. Looking around. But 4 out of 5 cows slipped on this surface when they were being led by Julie. The foot off was, the rate at which the foot came off at the end of the stance was short, which indicated they might have been unsure about the footing. And the stride itself was short, so maybe related to low confidence on the surface. They went that way. Yeah. Epoxy concrete, lower vertical acceleration, low shock on the surface, which suggests the cows were placing their feet gently on this surface. There was higher horizontal acceleration, the feet were decelerating to a stop very quickly when they contacted the surface. Sorry, drink break, I'll be back. Thank you. And because this is such a rough surface, that higher horizontal acceleration could be associated with wear on the foot. We want to see that quickly. There we go. Cows were probably wondering what the heck this was all about, but yeah. Moving along. Epoxy concrete. 3 out of 5 cows slipped on this concrete. The feet came off quickly. The stride was short. Again, suggesting a lower confidence of them walking on this surface. Their feet, despite the fact they're encased in these massive fingernails, their feet are incredibly sensitive, because the laminar connection between the bone and the hoof itself, that's very highly innervated. So their feet are as easily as sensitive as our fingertips, if not more. Grooved rubber mat, because it was rubber, it slowed the deceleration down, so the foot didn't hit too hard. But there was high horizontal acceleration, indicating the feet came to a stop pretty quickly. On this surface, that's probably not too bad a thing. It's a fairly giving surface, but every single cow slipped at least once on this surface. The foot off was quick, stride was short, indicating that they weren't too confident about being on it. Next. And sorry, yeah. The high profile rubber mat, again, quite hard. They were hitting it quite hard, so there's a high vertical acceleration. There's a high horizontal acceleration, saying the foot was coming to a stop very quickly, which may be associated with either hoof wear or mat wear. Either way, the foot was sliding into the surface. But they seem to have sure footing on it. They left their foot on for a long while. That indicates they were quite comfortable having, to me, indicates they were comfortable having their foot on the ground. And again, long stride, high confidence. So they felt the surface, I assume they felt the surface wasn't dangerous to them or unsecure to them. And I think this is the last one, low rubber, no, we've got turf yet. Low profile rubber mat, should be getting the ideas now. Cows were placing their feet gently on the surface. There was a high horizontal acceleration, which would be indicative of causing hoof wear, except this is a rubber mat. So both the mat and the hoof are probably going to wear equally. Again, all the cows slipped on this. And as you can expect, you know, all of you probably wear rubber boots. When they get wet, they get slippery. Short foot duration, so indicating the cows were unsure about the footing, and the same with the stride. Turf grass. Oh, got to show you the video. This is our contraption for getting the animals to walk on the turf. Firmly attached, but loosely attached to the tractor, so they didn't take off like that one was trying to do. But they were all quite comfortable being on the turf, being as none of them ever been outside. This was the most cushioning surface, had the lowest vertical acceleration, lowest horizontal acceleration, so that, as you might expect, the foot met the surface in a very natural way. There was slow sideways movement, again indicating there was not much tendency to slide to one side. All the cows slipped, and this wasn't wet turf, but it was fairly long grass, so sliding on the grass, which indicates that maybe slipping shouldn't be too much of a concern. But I think it becomes a concern when it's not so much a slip, but it's a very rapid slip. It's a high acceleration and a high deceleration, sort of like you stubbing your toe. That would be more of a concern than a slip on its own. They took long strides. They were obviously a long time to get the feed off, so they were quite confident walking on the surface. So that's the comparison of the surface. Just some other data that we found, that we had sensors on both feet, or on both claws, sorry, and they gave different data. And as you might expect, the two toes are loaded unevenly, with more strain on the medial claw than on the lateral one. Given that there's a big springing shock absorbing mechanism in the bones and tendons up here, I don't think you can make much out of that. It's just an interesting fact, and I don't think anybody's shown that before. Footfalls are quicker when the animal's moving faster. Yeah, that should be fairly obvious. Increased speed of the foot falling, hitting the ground, means that it comes to a stop much more quickly. There's much greater rate of deceleration when it's moving fast. For these animals that rarely move fast, it's not going to be that much of a problem. We did record from some of them as they ran unbidden across the surface, and there certainly was more force on their feet. But how often do these dairy cows run? I don't think that's a cause for concern. Oops, I'm sorry, I'm not going to show you that video. What's on this one? Yeah, can you see that little slide? I'll show you that again. As that foot comes in, that's not that one. Let's come back to the beginning. This foot, see that little slide as it hit the surface? That's really common, and that's part of what our sensory apparatus is measuring, is how it's sliding to a stop. On the epoxy-coated concrete, that slide was very long, so it slowed the feet down at a slower rate. And it's the fact that the surfaces have different grip or slipperiness suggests that the cows are monitoring how their feet hit the ground, as we do, and they're basing the speed of their footfall on more than just the hardness. The amount of slide or restriction of that slide is also part of the equation. And they adjust to that immediately, as our own nervous system does. There it goes again. So in terms of hoof wear, there's not a lot from these data to indicate that any of these surfaces promote more hoof wear than others. Certainly the feet interact with the surface in a different way, but it'd be difficult to extrapolate, say one is going to wear the feet more than others. I think that sandy one is probably the one that they're going to, that's just my opinion, that sandy one's probably going to wear their feet down most. The turf grass was both softer and in terms of slowing the foot down and modulating the vertical impact, which says that it would potentially advantageous for artificial surfaces to mimic turf a little more closely. I don't know how you do that, but I'm just throwing that idea. Obviously, the foot is evolved originally to interact with turf. So slipping. Almost all the cows slipped on all the surfaces. There were one cow didn't slip on the grooved concrete, and two didn't slip on the epoxy concrete, which is sort of counter to expectation. I thought the epoxy concrete would cause more, but maybe they were just being more careful. But slipping occurred on all the surfaces, and that may or may not be a concern because slipping is a potential cause for lameness. It may just be that these speeds that these cattle move are so slow that the biomechanics of their leg can accommodate the slips without any concern. I'm sure you've seen this kind of movie all the time. Yeah. So this project basically did a couple of things. It validated the technology that we used on horse feet. We validated that it could be used on cows. But it also gave a pretty good indication of the kinds of differences between the surfaces, some of which are unpredictable. The surfaces are, other than the turf, are all designed surfaces in one way. But as far as I know, nobody's ever compared them and say, okay, do they behave up to their own design specs? And how does their design and their performance compare with other surfaces? And that's what this study showed. I will leave it there, and thank you very much. So last slide. Okay. Sorry, I'm not going to do these because yeah. There we go. That's the last one.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that awesome presentation. A few questions here that have come in that I'll ask. What is the lifespan of the different textures of flooring that you tested? Any
You'd
thoughts
have
on
to ask
that?
the cattle people that. I expect they have different lifespans. I mean, putting down concrete, I assume the concretes have the largest lifespan.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. So people choose concrete and rubber for different reasons. So some of it is animal cow comfort related, and some of it is in barn related. So rubber does have a lifespan to it. The surfaces that we tried and measured all this stuff on in 2019, so that barn was new in 2015, I think. And those surfaces are still in play, although there's been some discussion as to renewing some of those surfaces, at least preliminary discussions. So I think, you rely on what some of the manufacturers and experience is, but obviously concrete's your longest lasting surface, and the rubbers probably have some surface value in terms of longevity, but it'd be less than concrete.
I think also you'd have to modulate these data or pair these data with data from the barns themselves, and the dairy farmers know the prevalence of different kinds of foot injuries in their cattle, and maybe if there's a high incidence of injury, then looking at a different surface might be useful. And if there's a low incidence, they've obviously got it right.
I continue to invite participants to put their questions there in the chat, either for everyone to see or direct to myself. The second one here, with long-term use of a single surface type, would cows adapt and it change the amount of slipping or the way that they place their foot, or would it be kind of constant?
It's going to have to be a speculative answer because this was a short-term study. Um, I think we saw some behavioural adaptation already in the rate at which they were putting their feet on the ground, the duration, so the length of the stride. It's like us walking on different. You walking on a ridged concrete pavement and coming to the edge of a pond and walking out on the ice. You modulate your gait instantly, and we were seeing a less extreme version of that with these surfaces. Feet are very sensitive, even hoofed feet are very sensitive, and the feedback goes straight to your um, autonomic system, whatever system controls, reflex system, that's the word I want. And your reflexes take over and modulate how you walk depending on the surface. So what I think a lot of what we were seeing, the cattle, was exactly the same as what we do when switching from surface to surface.
Are there any anatomical differences between dairy and beef or mature and younger animals to expect results would be similar or different for like a younger feedlot animal, for example?
Okay. Dairy and beef, I would imagine the weight difference would come into play because I believe that the beef cattle get somewhat heavier. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, the feedlots do, sure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so that makes a difference because their feet don't get any bigger as they're putting on weight. Does that induce more injury? I don't know. You'd have to ask the producers themselves. Sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Just a mature animal versus a younger animal.
Okay, what comes into play is uh, the technical term is allometry. A juvenile cow this high is not half the weight of its mom, who's maybe twice as high. Mom is going to be 5, 6, 10 times heavier than the baby. So baby's feet tend to get loaded less because they're that much lighter than mama. Um, so there will be age-related changes, but they're actually in favor of the baby rather than the calf rather than the adult cow.
Okay, and just lastly, do you think was there a difference in the way the cows walked when they were led wearing a halter versus if they were without a person in front of them?
Julie, short answer, yes. But Julie spent, we needed to get the range of speeds as constant as possible. So they had to be led. And Julie spent at least 6 to 8 weeks before the trial conditioning those cows to be led by her. So she was the one who controlled the speed, apart from the odd cow that said, no, I'm not going, and the odd cow that said, out of my way, I'm coming through, but most of the time they were just so used to being led by her that she controlled the speed. And as you saw, the lead rope she wasn't towing them. The lead rope was usually slack. They were just following her. And that's because she trained them to do that.
So I have one last question here. Does it stand to reason that the feedlot animal, young and rapidly gaining, undergoes huge hoof/experience changes over time?
Yes, rapid weight gain, certainly, but their musculoskeletal system, like ours, adapts to increasing load. So as they get heavier, unless it's going on really, really quickly, there's no relative decline or decline in the relative strength of their legs. The legs sort of keep up to them. The bone remodels, the tendons get thicker and stiffer as they go. And don't forget, for the most part, these are animals out in the wild galloping across the countryside. Their motions are fairly delicate. And they place their feet carefully for the most part. They're not just bouncing off them like kangaroos. That would be kind of fun. So yes, there are differences in proportion in answer to the question of weight to strength and foot size with age, but I don't think they're a significant part of this discussion, particularly.
Okay, I think we'll
Thank
wrap it up
you.
there. Thanks to both of you so much for joining us tonight and sharing
My pleasure.
those
Our
findings.
pleasure.